to No Punt Intended, presented by Club Fantasy. Ryan Weisse back in the host seat while Joe Zollo is out having a real job. The 2023 fantasy football season is over. Championships have been won. Hopefully payouts have been received. Grievances have been aired. And January is a time for accountability. We are going to take a look back at our 2023 team-by-team predictions and figure out what went wrong. We have 6 teams for you today. Let's get into it. Welcome to No Punt Intended, presented by Club Fantasy. Ryan Weisse hosting with you tonight. No Joe Zollo as we take a look back at the 2023 season, but with me, as always, Josh Hudson. Josh, how are you this evening?
Doing great. It's the second day off in a row that I've had, so I'm like, all right, usually Wednesdays are my first day off of the week. This one's the second, so I'm like, all right, we're easing into it. So feeling a little rested and rejuvenated, to say the least. So
no, I love it.
Doing good.
So, Josh, one of the things I think I compliment you about this every January. It seems like Joe does need a show off like every January because I feel like I'm talking to you about this. One of the things I love about the culture you've created at Club Fantasy is we are all about accountability. As soon as I started writing with you guys, I added an accountability section to my streams of the week. And we like to look back and figure out what we did right, but more importantly, what we did wrong. And that sounds like, we're making jokes and this, that, and the other. But you can learn a lot by what went wrong in the season, Josh. And that's what we're going to take a look back at today, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. This is going back to all of our off-season team preview shows and kind of breaking everything down, like the calls that we made, the explanations we gave. Now we've got a full season of data. Where do we fuck up? That's the long and short of it.
Yeah. I said 6 teams in the thing. It was 8. I swear when I looked at the show sheet today, not all of these teams were on here, but maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, they were.
Okay, so yeah, I clearly was scrolling way too fast. So let's get through 8 teams today. We are going to be covering the Carolina Panthers, Houston Texans, Arizona Cardinals, Indianapolis Colts, Denver Broncos, Los Angeles Rams, Las Vegas Raiders, and the Atlanta Falcons. What a way to end the show. But Josh, before we get started, some coaching news. Those Atlanta Falcons have parted ways. The Wicked Witch is dead. I don't mean to dance on someone's proverbial grave. Arthur Smith no longer with
he's so well off. I don't even give a shit for rooting for the fact that he doesn't have a job anymore.
That's true. Let's be clear. We should not be worried about celebrating someone losing a job with any of these NFL coaches because they're all doing a lot better than anybody who's watching this show. A very well-liked guy, but a guy whose time was probably ready to come to an end. Ron Rivera also gone in Washington. Interestingly enough, we did the mock draft show on Monday, and Austin said that he thought Mike Vrabel might be leaving the Titans voluntarily. Turns out there was no voluntary about it. Titans gave him his walking papers, and the Seahawks announced today that Pete Carroll is going to be moving into an advisory role with the team, no longer the head coach. Josh, there are 7 head coach openings in the NFL right now. The Panthers, the Raiders, the Chargers, the Falcons, the Commanders, the Titans, and the Seahawks. If you, Josh Hudson, were the guy, you're from the Sean McVay tree, everybody wants you. Which one of these jobs do you want?
Oh, man. I think when you factor in personnel, team, cap, all of that good stuff, I'm honestly choosing the Falcons. I know that I know that I don't have a quarterback. I completely understand that. But they went out, they spent their free agent cap on fixing the defense, and the defense has played phenomenally this year. They have a good offensive line. They have 2 really good running backs. So even if I don't have a quarterback, I can win games with an effective running game and good defense. Okay.
7 of them for sure.
Yeah. I'm right. I'm in a position at 8 overall where I can potentially make a move up the draft board to get a young quarterback that's available, or hit the trade market, because here's the thing. If Chicago is hell-bent on keeping Justin Fields, that leaves one of the 3 quarterbacks open for you to trade up for, right? Because you have to think Chicago, Washington, New England. Those are the teams that are going to be right at the top that realistically are in a position to get a quarterback. If Chicago bypasses, now the number 1 pick is open, right? Maybe they only trade back a couple spots so that Washington, New England can get their pick of the litter, or the number 1 overall pick comes up, right? Now I can make that jump to go get Caleb Williams because my defense is fixed and I have offensive pieces that I don't have to worry so much about plugging premium offensive talent holes in the first round over the next couple of years. And I can put my quarterback in a position where he has a number 1 wide receiver who he used to throw the football to, mind you. Or excuse me, did he ever throw to Drake London? I don't know that he did. Now that I think about it, because Caleb Williams was an okay.
Yeah, he did not.
Scratch that. But anyway, he's got Kyle Pitts, has Drake London, has Bijan Robinson, and another really good running back there in Tyler Algier. That would be the team that I would want if I am the hottest commodity amongst coaching candidates.
I actually completely agree with you. I would refuse to interview with the Raiders because that is Antonio Pierce's job, for the love of God.
Yeah, it needs to be 100%.
I would also refuse to interview with the Panthers because that's
a hot mess.
Seahawks are super interesting to me because this is a team that is a year removed from making the playoffs, obviously in a very tough division, so they weren't able to get in this season. But they have a lot of the similar building blocks that you're talking about, Josh. They have DK Metcalf. They now have Jackson Smith and Jigba. Tyler Lockett, obviously not quite there anymore. Kenneth Walker still there, and Zach Charbonnet. So I like the bill they have there. Plus, I get to work with Pete Carroll, who's still there. So I really enjoy the building.
And he knows defense. And they've had really good defenses over God knows how long. And like you said, if you don't have that quarterback in place, you can win games with a good running game and a solid defense.
Don't say I said it. You said it. It's your great take. Well, and then the Bears. Speaking of the Bears, they did fire Luke Getsy, which you've been calling for ages. They also fired the rest of their offensive coaching staff. So it appears Matt Eberflus is going to be maintaining that job. And the Giants parting ways with Wink Martindale, which is weird to me because the defense is the only thing that's worked there for the last couple seasons. So
100%.
It is what it is. But now it is time, Josh, for the look back, which we are now, nicely referring to what went wrong. And we're going to start with those Carolina Panthers. And what went wrong is the owner, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're going to look at the fantasy. So if you guys are new to the show, we have a lot of new subscribers. When the offseason, the offseason, because this is still the postseason, officially begins, we do 3 to 4 teams a week where we give you guys the guys we think are going to pop, usually someone that we think is going to outperform their ADP. Sometimes we'll get into who we think is going to bust, but for this show, we're going to take a look back at our guys and some of Joe's sleeper picks. So for the Panthers, Josh, you and I both had Miles Sanders. Our guest that week was Andrew Cooper. He was a big rookie wide receiver, Jonathan Mingo believer. Joe's sleeper pick was Adam Thielen, and Joe's IDP pick was Brian Burns. But Josh, let's start with the offense. Let's start with Miles Sanders, and let's start with you. What went wrong?
Miles Sanders and the entire offense went wrong because Frank Reich, not as good as we thought he would be. That's for sure. They're literally outside of Adam Thielen, nothing went right with this Carolina Panthers team. And even Thielen disappeared for stretches.
For 9 games.
But I mean, for a guy that is 33 years old, 137 targets, 103 catches, 1,014 yards, seriously, hats off, because apparently wide receivers die at the age of 30. So to get 137 targets with that level of production and a wide receiver 17 finish, I'll take that all day, every day. But when it comes to Miles Sanders, a lot of my love came from the fact that he was reuniting with a system that he knew. Frank Reich was in Philly a year before he got there. Deuce Staley was in Philly with Miles Sanders. They have a very close relationship. All it took was 11 games for David Tepper to say, Frank Reich, you ain't it. And then after that, Miles Sanders was nothing. Basically lost his job to Chuba Hubbard. I will say the one thing that really played a lot to my point was that they would use Miles Sanders in the passing game. And they did. 41 targets, 27 catches, 154 yards. That was great. But they just could not get the running game going. This offensive line was so bad. Yep. So bad. Bryce Young and the other quarterbacks that were in for the Panthers this year, 65 times they were sacked. If teams are getting to the quarterback that much, there's no way in hell their running lanes being open for Sanders or Chuba Hubbard at that point. So, I mean, you kind of got to chalk this one up to just being a waste of an offensive situation. But even when he had the football, Miles Sanders really did not play well.
And that's what I was going to hit on is I think we saw that great season in Philly, and at least for my own projections, I carried too much of that forward into this season with Carolina. And you hit on the very first point I wanted to hit, Josh. From the very first game the Carolina Panthers played, which I think was the Hall of Fame game, but regardless whether it was or wasn't, all we heard about was Bryce Young getting hit, Bryce Young getting sacked, Bryce Young getting hurried. I am lucky enough to cover the Panthers for Football Guys. All I read about in practice was Bryce Young getting hit, Bryce Young getting hurried, and how well he was handling it. Well, it's a lot easier to handle it in practice when you get to take a break after every single play and these players aren't really trying to kill you than it is in the actual game, and things just fell apart for this offense. Speaking specifically to Miles Sanders, where everything went wrong with my projections is I had him as a bell cow. Interestingly enough, I had him at 248 carries. Chuba Hubbard had 238 carries. So maybe I just had the wrong bell cow, but this is what I was talking about, Josh, with carrying too much forward. I also had him at 10 rushing touchdowns, and you kind of hit on the bad offensive line. There was never going to be rushing lanes. This team managed 6 rushing touchdowns from the RB position. So giving him 10 was just a fool's error on my part because, again, I bought into what I saw in Philly. I bought into the coaching staff, and it was a mistake. I didn't give any wide receiver over 100 targets. So I definitely didn't see the Adam Thielen thing come. But you know me, and interestingly enough, this was the show we had Coop on. Tight end is a position that I like to dig into, and I had my man Hayden Hurst leading this team in targets at 90 targets. He played 9 games and had 32 targets. It looked really good for about 2 games.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I did have Thielen over 100 targets. I had Hayden Hurst at 94. So, I mean, I was right there with you giving a lot of targets to the tight end position. But, yeah, I will say about the only thing that I got right on the Panthers was DJ Chark.
Ooh.
I had him projected at 69 targets, 39 catches, 541 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He ended with 66, 35, 525, and 5. I mean, that's about as close as you can possibly get.
Yeah, I want to see.
I'll take that. But outside of that, like, I mean, I had Sanders at 219 rush attempts. I was 90 off on him. I did only have him at 5 rushing touchdowns. Like, I fully expected major regression there. And I had just the running backs with the Panthers only scoring 9, but I did have Bryce Young getting 3. So I had the team at 12, but that's still double what they ultimately ended up with. So yeah. Not great, Bob. Not great. No.
I want to give Joe a little bit of shine here. So Joe, Adam Thielen as the sleeper, and he just put very large hit. So he certainly got that one right. And he admits it was not so much of a great second half, but the start makes him worth it. And he threw a stat line in here, which you've already quoted. On IDP, he had Brian Burns. Interestingly enough, he didn't go with Jeremy Chin, but neither one of them had an actual pretty good season. He had Burns as meh, wasn't bad, wasn't great, viable, but down for the year. 32 tackles, 15 for a loss, 8 sacks. And that's just kind of where he stands right now. So I agree. When you look at Brian Burns from an IDP standpoint, you didn't get what you wanted out of him, but Joe with a big hit on his sleeper, Adam Thielen, to get us started.
I mean, it was hard not to. He was wide receiver 60. So, I mean, even if he finishes as wide receiver 40, like, it's a win, really. But no, I mean, it was a smart play, though. Like, take the guy who they brought in to be the wide receiver 1, even if he is 30-something years old. That's basically the ideology that we went with Miles Sanders, because they paid him to be the guy. We just focused on the younger asset. That's all.
Yeah, 100%. Moving on to the Houston Texans. So from that episode, this was still Andrew Cooper. We typically cover 3 teams per episode. Our guys, everybody was a little different this time. Josh, you had Dameon Pierce. I had John Mechie. I was going for the feel-good story. Coop had Devin Singletary, so at least one of us was right. Joe's sleeper, John Mechie. Joe got me into John Mechie, so that's not a surprise. And Joe's IDP was Jalen Petrie. Josh, let's get back to the Houston Texans. You had Dameon Pierce. Our guest that week had Andrew Cooper. Josh, what went wrong with the Houston Texans?
Where to fucking start? Basically, this team did nothing that I thought they would actually do. Like, coming from this San Francisco system, I thought there would be a lot more balance in the run game and the pass game. So that's why I was leaning very heavily into Dameon Pierce. Yes, he did miss some time in his rookie year, but things were looking up. They brought back the entire offensive line, and the idea was, and they invested heavily, like every single one of those guys, the trades they made, etc. They all basically extended them, got them into large contracts. Like, they were setting this up. This was going to be, whether it was running, passing, whatever, they were going to fortify this offensive line. Pierce gets hurt, averaging like 2.5 yards a carry even before he got hurt. Exactly. Devin Singletary comes in, rushes 200 some odd or 216 times. So, like, the splits there were basically what I had. I just had them flipped. Yeah. So they didn't really use Pierce the way that they needed to, simply because he wasn't effective doing it. But I didn't think that CJ Stroud was going to come slinging the way that that he came out slinging. I was only about 9 pass attempts off, but I also had him playing a full 17 games. So he probably would have threw the ball 100 more times had he played not missed those 3 games to concussion. Yeah. But I was off by 900 yards. Like, CJ Stroud just completely flipped the script on what I thought he would do and what I thought he was even capable of doing, not just because he was a rookie, but because of how this team was set up. And truly, hats off to him, hats off to Nico Collins for breaking out, and hats off to Bobby Slowick, because I wasn't really privy to this rise of an offensive mind. I was just like, all right, he's from the San Francisco coaching tree. We'll just play it by ear and see what happens. And ultimately, I made the same mistake with Mike McDaniel 2 years ago with Miami. But that's when they show you who they are, right? Now we've got data to work with. He's an offensive play caller. All right, cool. He knows what he's doing. Get him a really good running back. The world is your oyster, homie.
Yeah. And that's going to be an interesting thing to see how they approach the offseason. Let's be clear, they're not mildly concerned about the offseason. Their eyes are on Cleveland coming to their home. And Caesar brings up a point. Pierce was a stud 2 years ago. So weird.
Was he, though?
Go back and look at those numbers, Caesar. Thank you, Josh.
He broke a lot of tackles.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's really what people were latching onto, was that give this guy a good offensive line and he can get at it. Maybe his skill set just doesn't fit with the scheme that is what Bobby Slowick runs. And that's entirely possible, because we've seen that happen with running backs, right? Especially guys that end up falling into the middle rounds. So much of their success ends up lying in the type of scheme that they end up falling into. And maybe Dameon Pierce is just that kind of player. He's a Jag.
I want to look back at the run that was Dameon Pierce. So he got hot. He definitely got hot. It basically started in week 4 against the Chargers. He had a good game against the Bears the week before, but it was an average good game. 20 carries, 80 yards, scored a touchdown, 4.4 yards per carry. Chargers 14 for 131, 26 for 99. So we're seeing that sub 4 yards, 20 for 92. Terrible game against the Titans, 15 for 35. This is his rookie year. Smashes your Eagles, Josh, 27 for 139. And then beats up on the Giants, 17 for 94, and then got hurt and did not play well. So he had a run, but it's one of those things where, did the league figure him out? Was it just one of those things where it was the right schedule, where there was somebody a few years ago, Josh, where they had the easiest end of year schedule ever, and we were so excited about it. And it's like, were they really that good? Was it just the schedule that was making them that good? But Josh, this is going to be the most hilarious what went wrong ever. What went wrong was CJ Stroud being so damn good, because that was not the expectation for this offense. We thought they would be starting slow. We thought there could be some good games. I like Dameon Pierce. I'm not even going to address my John Mechie pick. It was a feel-good story. The guy was coming back. I liked him from the draft because Joe told me to like him from the draft. He's clearly not ready to be back yet.
We galaxy brained that one.
Yeah. Thoughts and prayers, T's and P's, everything for John Mechie to come back full strength next year, and I hope he does. But that's just me. That was a bad look. It's not like I was highly drafting the guy. He was my last pick in many drafts, and he was my first cut in many drafts. But I did not expect CJ Stroud to be this good, and I'm going to be perfectly honest. I did not buy the Tank Dell hype. I was actually pretty close on Nico Collins. Didn't have his touchdowns up there again. Didn't know CJ Stroud was going to be this good. But Tank Dell blew my projections out of the water. I'm trying to get these up real quick. I had Tank Dell, Josh, at 40 targets. 40 for the season. Pretty sure he had that in a 3-game stretch. He had 75 in 11 games.
Yeah, I had him at 51, and I made a note of this. I'm like, if I'd bought more into Tank Dell as the wide receiver 2 versus Mechie, because where I projected Mechie, I would have been pretty damn spot on Tank Dell. But like I said, I was off by like 80 some odd pass attempts. So like if I'd even that out a little bit, maybe I'm a little higher on Nico, but I didn't really have any one wide receiver there that I was like, you know what? They're the number one guy. So I tried to like kind of even everything out a little bit to kind of like not so much like hedge, but what's up?
What did you have Nico at?
88 targets, 51 catches, 674 and 4. But again, that was the most targets that I gave to anybody. And then the next was Mechie at 79 and Dalton Schultz at 74.
Yeah, I kept hearing great things about Nico as the season was progressing. So I got Nico up to 100 targets, and thank goodness I did. He should have blew that number away. I think he finished at 109, but he also missed those 2 games with injury. So I caught on to Nico Collins, just didn't catch on to the touchdown. So yeah, what went wrong for the Texans is they were too fucking good. We weren't expecting
basically
we weren't expecting good Texans. Shout out to Coop on the Devin Singletary pick. Devin Singletary is a guy that the fantasy community likes to kick dirt on every year, but for at least the last 3 years, he's really made all of us look foolish and came alive enough this year. Joe calls John Mechie a miss, as he was, though I don't really call him a miss. He came back from cancer. But he did say he was definitely a long shot in the emergence of Tank Dell and health were the issues there. Calls Jalen Petrie a miss from IDP. It was a down year from what he did in 2022. Only had 60% of the tackles in this new season that he had the previous year. So definitely a couple of misses for Joe and a couple of misses for us when it comes to the Houston Texans. They were just too good. I think, Josh, the team that we all struggled with was the Arizona Cardinals, because coming into this season, we had no idea how much time Kyler Murray was going to miss. And I think that influenced a lot of our projections. So your guy, congratulations, James Conner. My guy didn't make it to the damn season because we did this show too early, DeAndre Hopkins. Coop picked Hollywood Brown, Joe's sleeper, Keontae Ingram. More on that later. Joe's IDP, Isaiah Simmons. Neither of those guys finished the season a Cardinal, so not so much analysis we're going to need there. Josh, what went wrong with the Arizona Cardinals, and what went right with your pick with James Conner there, buddy?
You know, this is really weird. I don't know that anything truly went wrong with the Cardinals, because we all knew this team was going to be a dumpster fire, in the sense that we had no idea how to project this team. Because when we did this show, DeAndre Hopkins was still a Cardinal. Kyler Murray, we was still getting back from the knee injury. We were projecting blind, straight up. And not only that, they brought in a new coaching staff, offense, defense, whole 9 yards. Like, everything was just flip a coin and see what the hell happens. Like, I wasn't even like spot on with James Conner, in the sense that like my projections were there. I just felt that he was the best value amongst like the players. And that's why I ultimately ended up going with him. But I think his ADP was roughly right around where he finished. So I don't even know that he was truly like a value. But based on like points per game, yeah, he definitely exceeded expectations. But like, I mean, Hollywood Brown's still getting 100 targets and only catching 50% of them. Like, this team in general was just bad this year. And we all knew they would be bad this year. So like, I don't really know how much more time to spend on this, because the whole damn team sucked.
I was going to say, I don't think we need to talk much about the Cardinals. One, we don't know any Cardinals fans. Kelly's not watching this show. I I did just notice, Josh, I was only 3 fantasy points on James Conner's entire stat line. I had him at what did he finish with? He finished at 201. I had him at 198. So
I had him at 200.87. So I was even closer than that.
Wow. Holy shit. You had the right points, bro. I was
way off on points per game, but there you go. I'll take that.
I definitely bought into Hollywood Brown. I wasn't sure how they were going to handle tight end, but Josh, you put it best. The team was a dumpster fire, and they played like a dumpster fire. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle their pick. They don't have one of the super early picks with a chance to get one of these quarterbacks unless they're going to make a crazy trade.
No, the Cardinals have the 3rd overall pick.
Did they get the 3rd? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I got the 4th. So I mean, like that's the thing. They're invested in Kyler, right? They've paid him all that money. So the idea is all right, surround him with talent. Either get another offensive lineman in there. Paris Johnson came on strong towards the end of the year, started to actually look like a franchise tackle there. They do still need another one. DJ Humphries is meh at best, and he's getting older. So maybe they ultimately get another tackle in there.
Yeah.
But you also have the opportunity to potentially get a legit number 1 wide receiver in Marvin Harrison Jr., just depending on what Chicago ultimately ends up doing. So, that's going to be the interesting struggle there, right? Because we know Chicago needs offensive linemen. Do they get one of these guys, or do they get the generational wide receiver if they ultimately move off the first pick? Because if you do that, you have to stay in front of Arizona, plain and simple.
Yep. Oh, I agree completely. Yeah, you can't unless Washington's trading up, because Arizona needs to take Harrison. I think you have the offensive coordinator in Arizona, whose name leaves me right now, but he came over from Cleveland. You have that Stefanski system. I think they see the value in. Yeah, I think they see the value of going and getting an Amari Cooper, going and getting that legit number 1 wide receiver. Yep. And I think that's what Marvin Harrison's going to bring. You pair him, even if you pair him with Marquise Brown for a year, it's going to be a really interesting thing that could turn around their entire offense. We've seen young wide receivers turn around entire offenses very quickly. So what they do in the draft is going to be the most important thing. And another team, Josh, where they were a victim of circumstance. The quarterback that we did all of our projections on were hurt immediately in the season is the Indianapolis Colts. When we look back at that team with my guys, you picked Michael Pittman, I picked Jonathan Taylor. Your guy didn't have his correct quarterback for half the year. My guy didn't play half the year. Linda was our guest, and she picked Jelani Woods. However, she also threw Michael Pittman in there. Joe had no sleeper. He did kind of throw Alec Pierce out there just because of how low the ADP was. It wasn't it. He did say Zach Moss would have been the right pick. Zaire Franklin was his IDP. Dog, career high in tackles. So Josh, again, another team we probably don't need to spend a ton of time on, but what do we think went wrong other than, losing Anthony Richardson after 2 games?
I mean, and that's it, right? When you lose your stud rookie quarterback who you've built your entire offense around with a lot of RPOs and utilizing his rushing ability to build the offense around, that's essentially what went wrong. But when you're able to bring in an established veteran like Gardner Minshew, who has won in this league, and also lost a lot in this league.
Yes,
but he's a quality backup and arguably probably the best backup quarterback in the NFL. And for them to be on the verge of making the playoffs, literally going down to the final game, there's something to be said for that when it comes to building the morale of this team going into 2024. When you're able to get Anthony Richardson back, when you get Jonathan Taylor back for presumably 17 games or at least 15 games. Like, there's a lot of things there's a lot of promise there, right? Yeah. But now you need to focus on getting those guys healthy, but also you got to re-sign Michael Pittman.
Yep.
Because he proved this year he's a number 1 wide receiver.
100%.
You get Anthony Richardson there, maybe Pittman scores more than 4 touchdowns. But he has the ability to haul in 100 receptions every single year and the ability to top 1,100 yards every year. Every young quarterback needs a reliable target like that.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of said it. We know what went wrong here. Pittman, I had him as a high target guy. Josh Downs, I still had behind Alec Pierce. I didn't see his emergence. Obviously, I wasn't expecting Jonathan Taylor to get hurt. I actually had Zach Moss with fewer carries than Deion Jackson, who I don't even think made the team by the end of the year as I'm looking at my projections here.
I think he got cut after like week 2 or 3, honestly.
Yeah. And then I had Evan Hull because I'm just a sucker for these late round rookies. I thought he might see something. The tight ends were a mess. But again, I had Anthony Richardson starting 16 games, Gardner Minshew starting 1. That's clearly not what happened. And that just changes the entire spectrum of what we expected from the Indianapolis Colts. Josh, before we move on, I want to backtrack to the Texans a little bit. And I want to bring a Caesar's question up here. He is Stroud in Dynasty. For a stack, which receiver are you targeting right now? Nico Collins or Tank Dell? I'm actually going to answer this first just because my answer is very simple. Whichever one I can get cheapest. I don't think there is a wrong answer here. I think Nico Collins is likely to be the cheaper option, but the thing is, even 3 years in, I think he is super young. I think he's 25 years old at 3 years in, whereas you sometimes see these older rookies. There are rookies that are roughly the same age as Nico Collins. So I would go after whoever is cheaper, and I'm thinking that's going to be Nico Collins, Josh.
I actually think that Tank Dell is going to be cheaper simply because he's coming off an injury. That being said, you see a lot of the shift in the NFL that's really gearing towards these quick twitch kind of smaller wide receivers, right? Your Tank Dells, your Wan'Dale Robinsons, even Tutu Atwell got some run this year. My issue with that, it's not so much that these guys can't be effective. It's that I don't think they can be effective for long periods of time. So when I'm looking at Dynasty, obviously you're thinking long-term, right?
Yeah.
Tank Dell is still on that rookie contract, which is valuable.
Absolutely.
Nico is up for an extension after this year. Correct. This was the career season that he needed.
Yeah, so they have to pay him this offseason.
They don't necessarily have to pay him this offseason. But this is the first year they're eligible to extend him. But because he wasn't a first-round pick, he doesn't get the luxury of that fifth-year option. So next year is the contract year. So now the team has to decide, is he worth the $25+ million that wide receiver ones get? Or do we let him hit free agency, maybe franchise him for year 5, so you still have 2 years of Nico Collins? For me, I'm going to invest in Nico because to me, he's more of a prototypical wide receiver. And I think to me, there's more value in that versus how they utilize Tank Dell and how they can utilize Tank Dell over the long term.
Man, we do way too many shows together because that is precisely the point I was going to hit is Nico Collins, what he did this year, that's his game. That's what he's going to do. We love what Tank Dell did this year. But man, were we sitting back and saying, they're not using him right. It's working, but they're not using him right.
Well, and I mean, look at it this way. And we talked about this a little bit earlier with the Texans and how I went through and projected this team thinking it would be very similar to the San Francisco offense.
Yeah. When
you stop and look at it, in the passing game, it was pretty similar, right?
Yeah.
Brandon Ayuk is having a career season
100%.
And stupid high efficiency where he's averaging like 16, 17 yards per reception. What's Nico Collins at?
That would be
basically the same fucking thing.
Yards per reception.
Basically the same thing. He just saw more targets. So if you're a fan of Brandon Ayuk in San Francisco, you need to be a fan of Nico Collins in Houston.
Yeah. I think that's a very fair comparison. They're not necessarily the same guy, but they're utilized the exact same way. I think Collins is the cheaper option, and that's who I would be going after. I just looked. Nico Collins is only 6 months older than Tank Dell. So it's not like it's an age game here. You are 100% getting the same age of player. But like Josh said, you're going to have Nico here for at least the next 2 seasons with CJ Stroud, and what comes of that comes of that. And personally, while Josh thinks Dell is going to be cheaper, I think you're probably going to be able to get Nico Collins cheaper. So that's just my take on that. And thanks for the question. Great question. First of all, hello, Craig. And Josh, Craig says he thinks building a bench, maybe not necessarily, he didn't say this, but I think this is kind of what he's going for here, is maybe not necessarily trading players away, all the time, and maybe having a stacked bench is not pretty much a good thing, because when he had injuries, when Nico and them got hurt, he had Michael Pittman to come in, and he had those different players on the bench. So maybe there's something to redraft about not trading away all of your good players right now.
Oh, it's true. 100%, especially like in this. I mean, shit, we had 60 starting quarterbacks this year, 64 last year. Like, the days of not rostering a backup quarterback in like shallow redraft leagues probably over.
Yeah, that sage fantasy advice experts love to give is quickly turning on its head, and you're going to start looking like an ass if you're telling all your readers to not bench start a backup quarterback. It's about time in these bigger drafts, even in these regular size drafts, get a backup quarterback, because they're not able to stay healthy. Worst case scenario, you have trade bait, which is something we could do or not do if you want to have that guy on your bench. Josh, we're going to keep the show sheet moving along. Denver Broncos. We, of course, had Linda on this episode. And Josh, as I looked over our show sheet, I couldn't help but notice that not one offensive player went right. You had Samaje P. Ryan. I had Jerry Jeudy, because I just don't know when to quit. Linda had Marvin Mims, who showed flashes, but certainly didn't do anything. And Joe's sleeper was Tim Patrick. His IDP was Alex Singleton. Joe knows what he's doing with IDPs. Joe is a big fan of Alex Singleton. But man, Josh, when I look at those offensive players, Samaje P. Ryan, Jerry Jeudy, Marvin Mims, Tim Patrick, we seem to have just all danced around Courtland Sutton. So I think what went wrong was we didn't know the right player to pick, even though we all loved him. But I know sometimes our guys, we try to go for the unnamed guys. But Josh, when you look at your projections and the Denver Broncos, what went wrong in 2023?
Everything. I had Jerry Jeudy with 123 targets. He had 87. So that was a huge miss. But like, I mean, I had Courtland Sutton as the number one wide receiver on this team.
I did as well. Yeah.
So that could have very easily been my guy. But I went with the value that was Samaje P. Ryan, because none of us had any idea what version of Javonte Williams we were getting. Yeah, and we knew that P. Ryan was going to have that, that target volume. And that's exactly what he had. 56 targets, 50 catches. I had him projected at 53 and 41 respectively. So I was pretty spot on with the receiving work, but I had him at 137 carries. That is not what he had. Anything close to it. 50. He only had 53 carries. So again, that was me kind of downplaying how much work Javonte was ultimately going to get, and how much in love with Jaleel McLaughlin Sean Payton would be. So there were a lot of unknowns that really went into this. I mean, the tight end position was basically a dumpster fire. Greg Dulcich was on IR for much of the season. They didn't really use a tight end there much at all. And the receiving work, I mean, Brandon Johnson coming out of nowhere to have targets. I mean, this whole offense was, they benched Russell Wilson with 2 games left. That's really all you need to know that went wrong with the Denver Broncos this year.
Yeah. We saw a lot of touchdowns out of Courtland Sutton, which I think kind of threw us all off. We didn't know which Russ we were going to get, especially after a bad season. And Craig kind of asks, can we move forward with Sutton? I think his question is Sutton going to be able to be successful in Denver? And I think that's a really good question, because Josh, we have to expect Jerry Jeudy is probably on his last legs in Denver. We don't know if we're going to get Tim Patrick back, but they seem to really enjoy Marvin Mims there. And Marvin Mims was drafted by Sean Payton, which is a big thing when it comes to Sean Payton and his offense. There's a reason why the last 2 games, Lil Jordan Humphrey was out here leading the team in targets, because he comes from that Sean Payton system. So Josh, do we think there's a future for Courtland Sutton in Denver when we don't know who the quarterback is and we don't know how they're going to approach the rest of the offense?
I definitely think so. And the biggest reason is because Courtland Sutton is a big leader in that locker room. And I mean, you saw how much Sean Payton valued someone like Michael Thomas, right? Who was a leader in that locker room until he became all about me, and then getting hurt all the time.
Yeah.
But Courtland Sutton, he's a guy that when you're bringing in young wide receivers, a la a Marvin Mims, that is who they are going to gravitate to. He's still very productive. He just, like 2 years ago, right before the ACL, signed a contract extension. So I don't believe they have like a big out for him heading into 2024. So I would fully expect him to be that guy. Jerry Jeudy is on his way out. I'm sorry. I mean, he basically regressed after last year, which was a career year, and everybody thought he was going to like pop off the scale and be this legitimate wide receiver 1. And I hate that I actually had him kind of being that in my projections, because I've never been a Jerry Jeudy believer. I've never believed that, because again, when you bring in it, you're looking at systems, right? Joe Lombardi coming in, maybe he's learned a little bit about how to feature 2 wide receivers in his offense, whereas Sean Payton's always, like, for the most part, yes, he spread the football around a lot, but most recently he was hyper targeting Michael Thomas. 100%. So I was kind of sort of trying to blend the two. And I said, you know what? Jerry Jeudy's still going to get quite a bit of work.
Yeah.
Well, shame on me for believing in a shitty-ass player.
So what's more interesting to me, Josh, is Jerry Jeudy still finished with 87 targets, only 3 behind Courtland Sutton. So it's not like you were wrong. It's just the 2 touchdowns versus the 10 touchdowns changes things quite a bit.
Well, yeah, but I had 54 receptions. Yeah. That's not a great catch percentage.
Yeah, 62% is really low for him. I had him projected at catching 66% of his balls. I also had him catching 13 yards per carry. Oh, he was at 14. I saw this. It was yards per target. That was super low. I was like, okay, because I was way off on that. Yeah, I don't know what went wrong here, but I want to talk about something that, Josh, I addressed when it happened. This team giving up while still in a playoff race is just the craziest shit to me. And obviously they didn't make the playoffs. They weren't really as close as it appeared to make the playoffs. So maybe Sean Payton is just a more realistic person than I am. But man, I understand injury outs and protecting the finances, but it just seems like such a bad move for the rest of the organization. And I just really hate that for a lot of those players. But yeah, I agree with you. Jeudy needs to go. If I'm Tim Patrick, I'm signing somewhere else just to protect my knees.
Well, he's another one that got signed a contract extension.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they've got some wiggle room with finances that they need to figure out, because, you know, they basically, before Sean Payton came in, they extended Courtland Sutton. They extended Tim Patrick. They signed, you know, they traded for Russell Wilson and signed him to that massive extension, which obviously the benching kind of signals the end for Russ there in Denver. But now that's another team that has a quarterback problem. Yeah. Because you can't convince me they're going to go into the season in 2024 starting Jared Stidham. That just ain't happening. Now, do you make another trade for a quarterback and go through the same process that you did to go get Russell Wilson? You're setting yourself up again for disaster.
They better go sign Joe Flacco.
Right?
But yeah, what an interesting team, and not one I think we need to spend a whole lot of time on. So we're going to move on, and that's going to bring us to the Los Angeles Rams. Kind of hard to say what went wrong, because we're talking about them this early because of how bad they were the year before. And now all of a sudden they're a playoff team again, just like the Houston Texans. When we take a look at our guys, Josh, you had Cooper Kupp. Obviously, great pick there. I agreed with you, Cooper Kupp, but I'm going to come back to my parentheses here in just a second. Linda, guess what? She had Cooper Kupp. So we all liked Cooper going into the season. Joe Sleeper, Van Jefferson. That's the definition of a miss. Doesn't even play for the team anymore. And then his IDP is Aaron Donald. I don't care if Aaron Donald only played 1 down this season. That's always the right call when you talk about the Los Angeles Rams. And Josh, we're going to talk about this team and say what went wrong. I don't think anything really went wrong. We could take a look at our projections. I think we could probably focus on the running back position, because not a lot of us talked about running back at all. But I want to get back to my parentheses, Josh, because I'm guessing this came right from the show sheet, and I appreciate you remembering to include it.
I go back and I look at all this and I'm like, all right, that's why I put Linda's honorable mention of Pittman. Like, I'll give props where props are due, and they're due.
So after I mentioned Cooper Kupp, I said, Puka Nacua could be fun this season. And man, oh man, Josh, was Puka Nacua fun this season. And I remember saying on that show, I'm not saying draft him as your wide receiver 2. I'm just saying maybe your last pick, it's worth a flyer of Puka Nacua. And I love to tell you guys, you want to talk about what went wrong, Josh? Let me tell you guys a Puka Nacua story. So in my home league, a league and a draft strategy I always give you guys is don't draft a kicker, don't draft a defense, draft extra players for trade bait until you have to make a decision. And Puka Nacua was one of those extra players, one of my very last picks in this draft. and I shopped him, and nobody believed in me. And I had this gut feeling, Josh, and I said I should hang on to Puka Nacua. And I fucking cut Puka Nacua and then spent the entire season crying about wide receiver problems when I cut the wide receiver 5 at the beginning of the season. So what went wrong is me not trusting my extremely large gut. It's there for a reason. It's there to tell me when to be right. So pour one out for my season in Puka Nacua, and even worse, my division rival got him. So that just makes things so much worse. But Josh, I want you to, we know what we got right, but let's take a look at these running backs, because I know at the start of the season, you weren't a Kyren Williams guy. And obviously when we did our projections, Cam Akers was still there. I also was not a Kyren Williams guy at the beginning of the season, except I did have him lead the team in targets, which is not nothing. But I thought they were going to feed Cam Akers just as much as the next guy. So we bought way too much into the reconciliation between Cam Akers and the Los Angeles Rams, Josh.
Yeah, I definitely did. I had him at 229 rush attempts, 1,008 yards, 9 rushing touchdowns, 33 targets, 26 catches, and et cetera, et cetera. I had Kyren Williams at 76 rush attempts. So what went wrong? I'm a dumbass. That's what went wrong, because Cam Akers sucks, and I should have just remembered that. It's the same issue that I have with Jerry Jeudy. When I don't think players are good, stop projecting them high just because they're at the top of the depth chart in the beginning of the season.
I am the premier Cam Akers hater. I don't mess with people who tear their Achilles tendon as a life rule to live by. And I also gave him 227 carries, Josh. That Achilles can't carry the ball 227 times. What were we thinking?
And this is ultimately what happens. He goes on a late season run, gets us all kind of buying back in after, getting benched, requesting a trade, kind of, mending fences a little bit, and then, finishing the season strong. You come into this season. I mean, Kyren Williams was a 5th round pick. There was literally no emphasis that needed to be put on him. He's a depth piece. He's not somebody that is realistically going to be a feature in this offense. And egg on our face, because arguably the best running back performance in the NFL this year. Yeah. I mean, he averaged more rushing yards per game than Christian McCaffrey.
I say anyone.
Shit. Missed 5 games, I think, and finished as RB5. Duh. And I've mentioned this on several occasions. It is very hard for me right now when you look at the running back landscape and you're trying to project out for 2024. I'm having a hard time trying to move off of Kyren Williams as the RB2 off the board after Christian McCaffrey. And that's me factoring in what Breece Hall did to end the season. Kyren Williams has been that good. This system is perfect for him. And we brought this up earlier on this show. Systems sometimes matter for running backs. You can have all the talent in the world, but if that system is perfect, that's what this system is for Kyren Williams. So, sign me up for all the Kyren Williams in 2024, and then we'll come back to this show in 2025, and I'll probably have egg on my face again because he shit the bed.
I'll tell you right now, my over-projection of Kyren Williams in 2024 is going to be epic over-projection. Him and Puka, give them all the fantasy points. Caesar brings up a good point going back to some Chicago takes, but just went wrong with this season. Justin Fields not running wild. And Josh, I think this is such an interesting point, because you have been the one that said at the very least Getsy needs to go, because it was very clear early on Getsy was not using Justin Fields properly. I think for the first 4 weeks of Monday's Anxiety, you had to start the show talking about why aren't they letting Justin Fields run the football?
Yeah, why? Now they figured that out. It's the OC problem. It's not the quarterback. So, but real quick, I want to bring this up about Puka Nacua before we move on. So when I statted out the Rams, the wide receiver 1 on the Rams, was the stat projections. Obviously, we know we're talking about Cooper Kupp here. Yeah. The stats were 164 targets, 118 yards, 1,488 receiving yards, 10 receiving touchdowns, 64 rushing yards, and a touchdown. Here was Puka Nacua's final stat line. 160 targets, 105 catches, 1,486 yards, 6 touchdowns, 89 rushing yards. All I had to do was switch the damn names.
Flip those names. Puka Nacua finished with 298 PPR fantasy points. Josh, I had Cooper Kupp at 315. What did you have him at?
I had him at 3. I had Kupp at 339 because I had a lot of receptions, but no. And if you really want to like drag me a little bit, I had Puka Nacua projected for 25 targets.
Okay. Here's the thing. I'm so happy you said that because I at least had him at 57 targets. So at least I doubled you up and had my money where my mouth was just a little bit because it's hard to be the big believer in a guy. And then I still only had him with 100 fantasy points.
Yeah. And again, it just goes back to, we've been saying this for a while. Van Jefferson, not good at football. Why am I giving this guy 89 fucking targets?
Yeah, I think is that what I gave him to? Josh, our projection, I had him at 91. Our projections are so damn close. We do too many shows together. Let's move on to the Las Vegas Raiders. And I don't know what went wrong, but I certainly know what went right. I don't know when I became the president of the Antonio Pierce fan club, but that is where we stand. Looking at our guys, Josh, you went with your namesake, Josh Jacobs. Nothing wrong with that. Certainly not the season he had the year before. I went with Devontae Adams, but I mentioned Zamir White could be interesting. This was when Josh Jacobs was still in his contract dispute. Bob Harris was the guest that week, and he said Josh Jacobs, Devontae Adams. Joe's sleeper, Jacoby Myers, who was being drafted as the wide receiver 54. It's going to be a big, big hit for Joe and his IDP, Max Crosby or Divine Diablo. But he said, don't worry about Divine Diablo. Max Crosby is the best defensive edge player in the NFL. He thinks better than Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, rather. He thinks he's the best that there is. Josh, this offense wasn't what we wanted it to be. The quarterback never quite showed up. I think that's probably where what went wrong. Our players, Josh Jacobs, Devontae Adams, they didn't play poorly. They just certainly didn't play good for fantasy managers.
So I would argue Devontae Adams did play well. What killed him this year
and then again late
was the consistency, right? But that was the same issue in 2022. Played really well, but he had a lot of ebbs and flows in his performance. And the big pop to me, obviously, was Jacoby Myers. Like, yeah, they brought him in. They gave him all that money, but he's never been a big touchdown guy. Jacoby Myers accounted for, I did the math here, 11 touchdowns, 8 receiving, 2 rushing, and 1 passing.
One.
That is unfathomable when you look at the career trajectory of Jacoby Myers. Yeah. Josh Jacobs, you kind of figured he was going to be rusty, right? He logged a ton of touches in 2022. We knew that was ultimately going to take its toll. Efficiency was going to come down. I mean, you still wanted to project him high because of what he was capable of doing.
Yeah,
but so everything with this team was just dysfunctional. From the offensive play calling in the first half of the year, which ultimately led to Josh McDaniels getting fired, to the inconsistencies of the offensive line, to the even worse quarterback play. Nothing was going right. Yeah. So in reality, Josh Jacobs never stood a chance. And like, I knew better. I don't like putting all of my eggs into the baskets of the guys that touch the football 400 times. But again, when you look at this Raiders team, it was literally Jacobs or Adams. That's who you want.
Yep.
I went with the running back. Stupid me.
So Jacobs played on the franchise tag this year, right?
Yep.
So 3.5 yards per carry. I think it's safe to say the Raiders aren't going to be beating down his door to get him back. We saw Zamir White, efficiency-wise, play better than Josh Jacobs. But Josh, you know the motto of a show that you and I are on. It's called backup running backs are supposed to be more efficient. 4.3 yards per carry. My biggest worry is that Josh Jacobs leaves and everyone jumps on this Zamir White train and we end up with a Tony Pollard-esque situation, but you won't have to pay the draft capital.
Completely different. I think they're two completely different scenarios because when Josh Jacobs is in the game, he is the bell cow. It's not like somebody else is coming in for 5 to 7 carries and taking loads off of him. He is the guy that's getting 95% plus of the touches, right? Zamir White, all of that work was in injury replacement of Josh Jacobs.
Where he was, again, the bell cow.
Where he was the guy. So I don't think that this is going to be an issue of, expect a huge dip in yards per carry if they don't bring back Josh Jacobs, which, depending on who that head coach is, whether they bring back Antonio Pierce or they bring in someone else. If they bring in someone else, I think that Josh Jacobs is gone. If they re-sign Antonio Pierce to be the head coach, I think Josh Jacobs comes back because I think that Pierce values these veteran voices in the locker room. He values the Devontae Adams. He values the Josh Jacobs. These are the leaders of that offensive sideline, right? They're the leaders on that side of the football. The same thing with Max Crosby on the defensive side. These are the leaders. These are the guys that Antonio Pierce is going to rely on. This is what what made the Eagles so great, because they have such strong veteran voices, and Nick Sirianni leans on them, and it worked for them last year. Antonio Pierce kind of has that similar mentality, or at least that's what where I see from the sneak peeks in the locker room and how he talks to the media. So I think that if Pierce is there, they bring back Josh Jacobs, even if it's only on like a 2-year deal with like a high AAV. And I feel like that's truly what these running back contracts kind of need to be, in all honesty, because that's how they're going to get their money. They're not going to be getting these 4, 5, 6-year contracts the way that some of these quarterbacks and wide receivers do.
And then we can just pour one out for Hunter Renfro's career at this point, right? I had the man with 80 targets. He couldn't even get on the field.
Yeah, I had him at 72, which was a huge whiff on my part. Big whiff.
Just to quickly get through Craig's question here, he just wants to know if we can trust the Raiders. I'm going to say it's a whole lot of hurry up and wait. Josh became famous on the Monday show when I would ask him hypothetical questions. Who's the head coach? Who's the quarterback? And that's what we're waiting to see with the Las Vegas Raiders as we head into next season. And Josh, it is time to finish the show with the Atlanta Falcons. And I think what went wrong is now unemployed. But when we look at our guys, we have Kyle Pitts for you, Drake London for me, Bob Harris, and the perfect summary of the Atlanta Falcons season, went off on a massive amount of tangents and never actually picked a player, which is perfect because guess what? Arthur Smith couldn't pick a player to be his guy on that team.
Kind of poetic, right?
Yeah. Guess what? Bob Harris was the only one of us that was right by not picking. Joe's sleeper, Matt Collins. Yeah. Joe's IDP, Troy Anderson, only played in 2 games. So didn't work out real well for all of us. I do want to point out that I don't know if you wrote this or Joe wrote this. Joe picked the Falcons to win that division. And
I put that in parentheses because I had to go back and rewatch a little bit of that episode, because when I looked at the show sheets, Bob didn't fill in any players.
That's right.
So I was like, all right, let me go back and watch and see if maybe he just like picked somebody on air. And that's where the parenthesis came from. But when we did that show, like you see where mine says projections are hard. Yeah. Joe put Atlanta Falcons division winners. So I made it a point to say that in the show sheet. And those tabs underneath, that's Joe justifying that pick.
So let's talk about this real quick, because we know what went wrong here. We've been beating this horse for months now, and we'll talk a little bit about the Falcons. But Joe said if Arthur Smith didn't have the brain cells of a 1,000-year-old piece of fruit, this would have been an easy 10-win team. He also said the defense would play better on the back of Jesse Bates, which is actually quite right. And Bates back to the Pro Bowl because he's a dog. However, Falcons to win the division, while it sounds hilarious, they actually weren't that far off, because what just a dog shit of a division. So Josh, I mean, what went wrong with the Atlanta Falcons is Arthur Smith and Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke wasn't who we thought he was going to be.
No, he wasn't what you and Joe thought he would be.
Very clear. Yes. He's not who me and Joe thought he was. So looking at this team, it's easy to start from the top down, but It's also pretty interesting that Kyle Pitts, seemingly, Josh, your guy, couldn't really outplay Jonnu Smith as a tight end. And I'm starting to wonder, is there something more to where Kyle Pitts was a wide receiver playing tight end? Is there one of these things where like he's not good enough to be a wide receiver or a tight end? He's kind of stuck in the middle for the NFL. It's just weird to me.
So this just came out today. Kyle Pitts posted on his Instagram that when he had the MCL issue in the offseason, he also had surgery to repair his PCL in his knee.
Okay? Interesting.
So I don't think Kyle Pitts was ever 100% healthy this year. And I think that led to a lot of some of the issues where, because he's lining up out wide and he's seeing a corner, that he's not able to separate the way that a guy his size should be able to on corners that are just smaller than him, right? And be able to make those types of 50-50 ball catches. But the biggest issue really with Kyle Pitts, it was always usage, right? Like, you want mismatches. Mismatches come from the slot.
Yeah.
That's where Travis Kelce has dominated, because he's 5 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier than slot corners and linebackers.
Look at Isaiah Likely in Baltimore in limited time.
Yes, exactly. So that's how Kyle Pitts needs to be used, to stretch the middle of the field, not go up for jump balls on the outside. That's why you have Drake London, okay? Stop galaxy branding your way out of a fucking job. Oh, wait, you already did that. So
be gone.
Exactly. Like, Jonnu Smith was being used the way they needed to use Kyle Pitts, plain and simple.
100%.
And the problem with Arthur Smith is that he already knew how to use Jonnu Smith and hadn't quite figured out yet how to use Kyle Pitts. So that, to me, was a lot of the issues. But it all just boils down to bad coaching, bad quarterback play. That's what went wrong with the 2023 Atlanta Falcons.
Yep. And Craig agrees with you. He said, well said, Josh. And I couldn't agree more. Bad coaching, bad quarterback play. I saw a stat today right before we came on the show that I felt was the perfect way to end our discussion with the Atlanta Falcons. And I'm going to throw Craig's comment up on the screen. Bijan Robinson, drafted first. He was scared at first, and you had every right to be scared. And I don't even know that you're necessarily happy about what happened. But as a rookie, Bijan Robinson rushed for 978 yards. 1 year ago, as a rookie, Tyler Algier rushed for 1,035 yards, 50 more rushing yards than Bijan Robinson as a rookie. Tyler Algier was a relatively unknown running back. Correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, drafted in the 5th round.
5th round out of BYU.
Bijan Robinson was a top 10 pick and viewed as a generational talent. Arthur Smith, plain and simple, is a fucking moron. You have this guy, you have this offense that is built to run the football. You have this brain, I assume, up there that was built to design a rushing offense. You just made a 5th round pick, 1,000-yard rookie, and you can't figure out how to use Bijan Robinson properly. You then start playing games with the injury report and getting your team fined because of migraines, supposedly, which all felt like a BS thing. Arthur Smith was the problem with the Atlanta Falcons. And what went wrong was we looked at this team as this rushing juggernaut the year before, and we thought they were going to run Bijan Robinson 400 times. He was going to be the next DeMarco Murray, and everything was just going to go really, really well. And that is not at all what happened. And like I said, Josh, you put it best. He's a nepo baby, as the tabloids like to refer to these people these days. He's filthy, stanky rich. So fuck you, Arthur Smith, and I'm glad you don't have a job. Plain and simple.
There you go.
Fantasy managers everywhere rejoice. Josh, I mentioned this in our group chat today when we were talking about all the head coaching vacancies. And I said, I didn't feel like there was that hot commodity this year. You are sometimes a little bit more tuned into this than I am. If you had your druthers, who is the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons next year with all these weapons?
I've heard a lot of rumblings that Bill Belichick could be the guy.
Oh my. Okay.
Yeah. If ultimately the Patriots decide to move on, which, I mean, it's been a couple days since Black Monday, which is typically referred to as the day that a lot of these head coaches get fired. And because we had 3 coaches fired in season, we didn't really have that level of like axe chopping that it feels like we typically have on Black Monday. We only had 2, and I say only, we had 2 coaches fired on Monday. Obviously, Vrabel yesterday on Tuesday, and then Pete Carroll moved into the front office on Wednesday today. So, there's a chance, obviously, that Belichick ultimately leaves because maybe they want him to really relinquish the GM duties. Maybe he's against that, or at least against doing it in New England, right?
Okay.
Like, he could ultimately decide that he's not going to relinquish that in New England. They move on, but when he picks his new team, he's fine just being the head coach, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like that's kind of when you listen to some of these interviews, like the subtle hints and the things that he said. Like, Belichick is very calculated with his responses, and I respect him a lot for that. Like, he doesn't give the media anything, so it's left up for a lot of interpretation. But when he says that he's open to giving up GM duties, yeah, sure, that could be the case. But where you've been the GM for 10 plus years and you end up staying there, why would you give that up if you stay there? That's basically admitting defeat at that point, right? But if you move on to a new organization, it's a fresh start.
Yeah.
So that could ultimately be where that power struggle leaves when it comes to New England. But like the hot head coach candidate is going to be Ben Johnson with the Detroit Lions. Like, and I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts about that. There's going to be a lot of talk, obviously, with Jim Harbaugh. I've been on record saying that I thought that if Michigan lost the national championship, he would ultimately come back. But I said if they won, which they did, he's more likely to come to the pros because he went to Michigan to bring a national championship back. He finally did that. He has unfinished business in the NFL, right?
Yep.
He went to the Super Bowl and lost. So that's in the back of his head. He wants to get back because he knows that he's a good enough coach that he can take a team to win a championship. So you're going to have teams that will fight for that. And again, he's a good coach. Raiders, I think, will be in the mix. I think Atlanta could potentially be in the mix. I heard some thoughts about Chicago, but it seems like they're going to move forward with Eberflus, which, again, I think is a huge mistake. Not because I don't think Eberflus is a good coach. I just think that you're setting yourself up on that Chicago Bears coaching staff to bring in a lame duck offensive coordinator. And what I mean by that is we've literally seen this with this franchise. They're in a position to draft a quarterback number 1 overall. They have a head coach who could very well end up getting fired.
Yep.
This is the same shit that happened with Mitch Trubisky. This was the same thing that happened with Matt Nagy, right? The former head coach, John Fox, drafts Trubisky, then gets fired. Matt Nagy inherits Mitch Trubisky. They end up moving off of Trubisky. He's forced to have Justin Fields.
Yeah.
Matt Nagy gets fired. Now Eberflus is stuck with Fields. If a new OC that comes in can't get him right, now this is year 4 going in for Fields. What's that going to do? It's going to cost Eberflus his job.
Yep.
And now
that
a new head coach
is gone as well.
Correct. So it's becoming this little trend here in Chicago that like they needed to just clean house, start from scratch, get everybody in place, let the head coach pick the quarterback and move on.
And that's what exactly let the head coach, because unless you're not firing Eberflus next year as well. Because that was what I was going to say is get a new guy in there right now while you're like, look, is it Fields or is it Caleb Williams? Tell me right now. so we know how we want to move forward with this. And I think it's such an interesting point. I was going to bring up with Jim Harbaugh. Do we think Arthur Blank might be scared off of hiring any college football coaches? Like, I don't know if that's going to work out real well.
After the Bobby Petrino fiasco.
But you brought up Belichick.
No, Dave Canal, the Bucs offensive coordinator. I've heard his name circulated.
Did he go back to Seattle though? I think.
Well, there's that thought. I've heard that rumor. I've also heard Dan Quinn, who is another hot name in head coaching circles, and obviously he has a connection there in Seattle. And I think with Pete Carroll going into the front office, bringing in somebody that has a connection with him is very likely to be the case. So I think those probably will be the top two guys. I got a really good chuckle out of the Carolina Panthers requesting to interview Eagles offensive coordinator Brian Johnson.
You're like,
because
please.
Honestly, please, God, take him.
We'll give you a draft pick.
Right? Yeah, no, and it's yeah. But like you'll have there's Mike McDonald, the defensive coordinator with the Ravens, I think has gotten a few requests. There's definitely some names that'll circulate. There's probably going to be a name or two that none of us even thought was going to be an option for a team, and they end up hiring him. So there's definitely going to be some interesting scenarios, because you have some teams that, man, they're going to be some projects. And if a head coach comes in there without an established pedigree, that job could very well be open in 2025, which I think is really unfortunate.
And going back to the Falcons, where this whole thing started, you made me think, where if Belichick's willing to come in and not be the GM, Terry Fontenot is the GM right there. And he came in with Arthur Smith rather. However, these great drafts that we've talked about the Falcons, that's this GM. So let Bill Belichick come in and just coach, and let this guy Terry Fontenot keep doing what he's doing. And you could have some real magic there in Atlanta. But as always, I think it's a great place to end the show with something Josh has been saying for months. Depends on who the coach is. Depends on who the quarterback is. That is going to be our take when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons next season. Craig, I see you mentioned your Niners and Steelers. They both had good seasons a couple of years ago, so they're going to be coming up later on in the series. We are going to cover all 32 teams. We are going to look back and see what our predictions were and what went wrong. And Joe Zollo has promised he'll be here for the rest of the episode so he can throw his 2 cents in. Though in Joe's honor, we ran way over on tonight's show. I'm going to quickly run through this. Josh, you can correct me if I'm wrong. DFS isn't going anywhere. Josh and Austin are recording shorts to give you guys some showdown slates. Not necessarily
short videos, not shorts.
Shorter videos. Yep, exactly. To give you guys showdown slate matchups for all of the DFS matchups coming up in the playoffs. This show, as we mentioned, the only week we take off is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We are going to be spending January talking accountability, and then before you know it, we're going to be talking NFL draft. Stars at tomorrow, some of my favorite time of year, because it's when I get to learn who the hell these college players are from very, very smart people far smarter than I am. So I'm looking forward to that time. But this show is going to be here for you every Wednesday from now until the week before Thanksgiving. So we're going to get you through the postseason. We're going to get you through the draft, the preseason, everything. We're there for you, free agency. And if you just need another DFS fix in your life, Who's Your Caddy just premiered yesterday. Kelly and Adam are breaking down the picks. Josh, you know the tournament. I don't know these tournaments very well.
It's the Sony Open in Hawaii.
Sony Open in Hawaii. That show just premiered. These guys crushed their picks last year. So whatever they said, just go throw a little bit of money on. Josh did that last year, and I know he turned a profit just by taking their picks, putting a little bit of money in their DFS lineups, and it worked out real well. Josh, did I miss anything? Any parting words for our friends out there?
I believe that's it.
All right. We appreciate you guys for riding with us. We will be back a week from today covering 8 more teams. I don't have the list in front of me, but it'll be 8 more teams. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be in the exact same theme of this show, but Joe Zollo will be back with us. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you in a week. Always remember, defense wins championships. Offense wins fantasy football. We'll see you next week.